In today's video, we're going to explore the extraordinary journey of Elijah, the prophet who defied kings and false gods, performed impressive miracles, and was caught up to heaven without tasting death. Have you ever felt alone, facing impossible challenges and doubting your purpose? Elijah's story is a powerful testimony to faith and courage in times of crisis. From his daring confrontation with King Ahab and the prophets of Baal, to his moments of despair in the desert and his divine renewal, Elijah shows us that, even in the most difficult situations, God never abandons us. His miraculous ascension to heaven marks the beginning of a new era, leaving a lasting legacy of hope and power. Join us and discover how Elijah's unwavering faith can inspire and transform your life today. But before we start, make sure you subscribe to this channel so you can help keep our work going and encourage us to bring you more and more incredible videos like this one. That said, let's get to today's story. It was a time of spiritual darkness and great corruption in Israel. Under the reign of the wicked king Ahab, the people of Israel had turned away from the true God, following the lead of his queen Jezebel, who worshipped the god Baal. Jezebel not only introduced Baal worship, but also persecuted the Lord's prophets, promoting idolatry throughout the kingdom. Against this backdrop of despair, where true faith seemed lost, God chose a simple man from Tishbe, a little-known place far from the big cities. Elijah was a man of deep faith, someone who lived in constant communion with God. He didn't have a big name or a high position, but he had something much more powerful, the conviction that God was real and present. When God spoke to Elijah, he listened and obeyed without hesitation. Elijah was called to be the voice of God, to challenge King Ahab and confront the idolatry that was destroying the people of Israel. Imagine the scene. Elijah, a man from the desert, standing before King Ahab. The king, accustomed to flattery and feared for his cruelty, is suddenly confronted by this bold and resolute prophet. Elijah fearlessly announces that there will be no rain or dew for years to come except at his word. In a country where agriculture was totally dependent on seasonal rains, this was a slow death sentence. Drought meant hunger, misery, and despair for the people. Elijah's challenge was not only against King Ahab, but also against the false gods that Jezebel had introduced. By announcing the drought, Elijah was showing that the Lord, and not Baal, controlled the forces of nature. He was unmasking the impotence of the idols and the falsity of the promises of prosperity they brought. Elijah knew that this declaration would put his life in danger, but his trust in God was greater than any man's fear. King Ahab and Jezebel were furious. They weren't used to being challenged, especially by a simple man like Elijah. But Elijah didn't back down. He knew that God was with him, and this certainty gave him unusual courage. The drought began, just as he had prophesied, and with it came times of trial for all of Israel. Elijah became a fugitive, hunted by royalty, but protected by God. His faith and obedience marked the beginning of a series of miraculous events that would not only prove God's greatness, but also restore faith throughout the kingdom. This was the first great mission of Elijah, an ordinary man with extraordinary faith who dared to speak in God's name against a powerful king and an evil queen. His courage and determination not only challenged the corruption of his time, but also planted the seeds for a spiritual revival in Israel. Elijah teaches us that when God calls, he also empowers and protects those who obey him, even in the darkest times. After defying King Ahab and announcing a devastating drought, Elijah became a wanted man. Knowing the danger, God instructed Elijah to hide by the Brook Kerith, a small stream that ran east of the Jordan. This isolated place would be his temporary refuge. Imagine Elijah's loneliness, a man of God on the run, cut off from everything and everyone, depending entirely on the Lord for his survival. But God did not abandon him. At the Brook Kerith, Elijah experiences one of the most extraordinary miracles. God orders the ravens, birds considered impure and selfish, to bring bread and meat to feed the prophet. Every morning and evening, the ravens bring food to Elijah, sustaining him during his isolation. Think of the impact of this. A man in the desert, fed by ravens, a clear demonstration that God can provide in unimaginable ways. Over time, because of the drought, the brook of Kerith dries up. But God has a new plan for Elijah. He instructs the prophet to go to Zarephath, a small town outside Israel, in the territory of Sidon. There, God had prepared another form of sustenance, this time through a poor widow. On arriving in Zarephath, Elijah found the widow collecting sticks. He calls her and asks for some water and a piece of bread. The desperate woman explains that she only has a handful of flour and a little oil, enough for one last meal for her and her son before they starve to death. Elijah, with unshakable faith, instructs her not to fear. He asks her to first bake a small loaf of bread for him, and then prepare something for her and her son, promising that the flour and oil will not run out until the day the Lord sends rain on the earth. The woman, believing in the prophet's words, does as he asks. And so, day after day, the promise is fulfilled. The flour in the pot and the oil in the bottle do not run out, sustaining them throughout the drought. But God's miracles don't stop there. The widow's son falls seriously ill and dies. In deep despair, the woman blames Elijah, wondering if his presence has brought God's judgment on her house. Elijah, with a heavy heart, takes the dead boy upstairs where he himself is staying. He cries out to God, stretches out over the boy's body 3 times and begs for the boy's life. God hears Elijah's prayer and restores the widow's son to life. Imagine the mother's joy and relief at seeing her son resurrected. These miracles not only provide physical sustenance and restore life, but also strengthen the faith of the widow and Elijah. The woman recognizes that Elijah is a true man of God, and that the word of the Lord in his mouth is the truth. These stories of divine provision and resurrection are powerful testimonies to God's care and power, showing that he is able to sustain and restore even in the most desperate circumstances. Through these events, Elijah not only survives, but his faith is renewed and strengthened. He sees firsthand that God is faithful and powerful to meet every need, even in times of great adversity. Each miracle is proof of God's love and care, preparing Elijah for even greater challenges to come. After 3 long years of drought, the land of Israel was devastated. Suffering and famine had spread throughout the kingdom, affecting rich and poor, powerful and humble. In this context, God sends Elijah back to confront King Ahab and bring an end to this tragedy. But this return would not be discreet. It would be an epic event, a powerful demonstration of the true God against the false gods of Baal. Imagine the tension growing as Elijah challenges King Ahab to gather all the people of Israel and the 450 prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. This holy mountain would be the stage for one of the most dramatic and decisive moments in Israel's history. The crowd gathered, curious and anxious to see what would happen. Ahab, accompanied by Jezebel, who carries an aura of arrogance and disdain, watches with interest. Elijah, with serene confidence, stands before the people and asks a crucial question. How long will you limp between 2 thoughts? If the Lord is God, follow him. If Baal, follow him. The crowd's silence was deafening. Elijah then proposed a test. 2 altars would be erected, one for Baal and one for the Lord. Each group would place a bullock on their altar, but would not light it on fire. The true God would be the one who responded with fire from heaven. The prophets of Baal begin their rituals. They call out to Baal from morning until noon, dancing, shouting, and even hurting themselves in an attempt to get their God's attention. The scene is frantic and desperate, but Baal doesn't respond. Elijah, observing everything, sneers. Shout louder. Maybe he's meditating or busy or traveling. Who knows? He's asleep and needs to be woken up. The prophets of Baal increased their efforts, but to no avail. When Elijah's turn comes, he first restores the altar of the Lord, which was in ruins. He uses 12 stones representing the 12 tribes of Israel to rebuild it. He then digs a ditch around the altar, something that seems a strange detail, but would soon make sense. Elijah organizes the wood, cuts the bullock into pieces, and places it on the altar. Then he does something even more impressive. He has 4 large jars of water filled and poured over the sacrifice and the wood. He does this 3 times until the water drenches the altar and fills the surrounding ditch. With all eyes fixed on him, Elijah approached and prayed, "O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you, Lord, are God, and that you turn their hearts to you." At the same moment, the fire of the Lord falls from heaven with overwhelming force. The flames consume the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, the dust, and even the water in the ditch. The sight is so powerful and undeniable that the people, in a gesture of reverence and awe, fall prostrate and cry out, "The Lord is God! The Lord is God!" This moment marks a decisive turning point. Elijah orders the capture of the prophets of Baal, and they are executed at the Brook of Kishon, putting an end to the corrupt influence they had brought to Israel. This event not only restores the people's faith in the true God, but also demonstrates that even in times of great apostasy, God is powerful to reveal His presence and reaffirm His sovereignty over all things. Mount Carmel becomes a symbol of divine victory and the restoration of true worship. The drought finally comes to an end, bringing renewal and hope to Israel. Elijah, through his faith and obedience, shows that God is the sovereign Lord, capable of working miracles and changing the course of history to reveal His glory and mercy. After his spectacular triumph on Mount Carmel, where God demonstrated His power by sending fire from heaven, the prophet Elijah expected a great change in Israel. However, instead of repentance and spiritual renewal, he was faced with a deadly threat from Jezebel, the wicked queen who worshipped Baal. Furious at the defeat of her prophets, Jezebel vows to kill Elijah, sending messengers to hunt him down. Elijah, exhausted and discouraged, flees for his life, with the weight of the mission on his shoulders and a sense of profound loneliness. He heads for the desert, an arid and desolate place where unforgiving nature reflects his emotional state. Elijah, a man of great faith, is now downcast, wishing for death. He sits under a juniper tree and, in a moment of despair, cries out to God, "It's enough, Lord. Take my life, for I am no better than my parents." This expression reveals his physical, mental, and spiritual exhaustion. He goes to sleep, hoping never to wake up. But God, in His infinite mercy, did not abandon Elijah. An angel touches him and says, "Get up and eat." Elijah wakes up and finds a loaf of bread baked over hot coals and a jug of water beside him. He eats and drinks and lies down again. The angel touches him again, insisting, "Get up and eat, because the journey will be very long for you." God was preparing Elijah for a spiritual and physical journey. Strengthened by food, Elijah walks for 40 days and 40 nights until he reaches Mount Horeb, the mountain of God. This is no ordinary place. It is the same place where Moses met God at the burning bush and where the 10 Commandments were given. Elijah takes refuge in a cave, still searching for answers and comfort. In his solitude, he is again visited by the word of the Lord, who asks, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Text here Elijah vents his anguish. "I have been very zealous for the Lord God of hosts, because the children of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword, and I alone am left, and they seek to take my life." He feels that he is the only one left faithful to God and that all his efforts have been in vain. Then God invites Elijah to come out and be in His presence on the mountain. The Lord passes by and a series of natural phenomena take place. A strong and powerful wind tears the mountains apart and breaks the rocks, but the Lord was not in the wind. Then an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. Then a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. Finally, there was a soft, quiet whisper. On hearing the whisper, Elijah covered his face with his cloak and went out to the entrance of the cave. In this whisper, God reveals His presence in an intimate and personal way, different from the powerful and frightening manifestations. He comforts Elijah, renewing his mission. God tells him that he is not alone. There are still 7,000 in Israel who have not bowed the knee to Baal. Elijah is instructed to anoint new leaders, including his successor Elisha, ensuring that God's work will continue. This encounter transforms Elijah. From a man in despair, wishing for death, he once again becomes a prophet with renewed purpose and strength. By revealing Himself in such a personal and gentle way, God shows that He is present even in the most desperate situations, offering direction and comfort. Elijah, now reinvigorated, is ready to continue his mission, knowing that God is with him and that his work is not in vain. After his transforming encounter with God on Mount Horeb, Elijah is ready to continue his mission. Among his new divine instructions, God commands him to anoint Elisha as his successor. This act will not only guarantee the continuity of Elijah's prophetic work, but will also prepare the next generation to follow God's will. Elijah sets out to find Elisha, a hard-working man known for his dedication and integrity. Elijah finds him in a very ordinary situation, plowing the field with 12 yoke of oxen. This apparently mundane scenario is the backdrop for one of the most significant moments in Elisha's life. He is totally immersed in his task, symbolizing the ordinary life and daily duties that most people know so well. Without ceremony, Elijah approached Elisha and threw his cloak over him, a gesture full of meaning. In the culture of the time, a prophet's mantle was a symbol of his authority and divine calling. When Elijah places his cloak on Elisha, he is essentially transferring the responsibility and power of his prophetic ministry. Elisha, aware of the significance of this gesture, feels the weight and honor of God's call. Elisha doesn't hesitate. He asks permission to say goodbye to his parents, showing respect and love for his family, but also making it clear that he is ready to follow a new path. He kills the oxen he was using and burns the equipment, a symbolic action that indicates his total break with the past and his unwavering commitment to his new calling. The feast he makes with the meat of the oxen is a celebration of his decision and a sign that he is ready to follow Elijah without looking back. Elisha became Elijah's assistant, accompanying him on his journeys, learning from him and serving him faithfully. This relationship is profound and formative. Elijah, with his experience and wisdom, guides Elisha, preparing him for the challenges and responsibilities to come. Elisha, for his part, shows humility, a willingness to learn, and a burning commitment to God's service. The transmission of Elijah's prophetic legacy to Elisha is crucial. It ensures that God's message and mission continue, regardless of adverse circumstances. Elijah, by investing in Elisha, demonstrates that God's work never depends on a single individual, but is a continuous work, passed on from one generation to the next. This passage of power is not only an act of leadership, but also an example of how God prepares and calls ordinary people to carry out extraordinary tasks. Elisha, from a simple farmer, becomes a great prophet, performing miracles and continuing the work of Elijah. This transition also reminds us of the importance of spiritual mentors who guide and prepare successors so that God's work can prosper and move forward. Together, Elijah and Elisha show that faith, obedience, and a willingness to serve God can transform ordinary lives into stories of impact and divine power. This union of teachers and disciples is a testimony to how God works from generation to generation, ensuring that his message of hope and redemption is never lost. Elijah's final moment on earth arrives, an event that would be as extraordinary as his life. Elijah and Elisha walk together, knowing that something monumental is about to happen. Elijah, the powerful mentor and prophet, and Elisha, the dedicated apprentice, cross the Jordan, a physical and symbolic barrier that prepares the ground for the miracle to come. As they approach the Jordan, Elijah takes his cloak, the symbol of his prophetic authority, and rolls it up. With a confident gesture, he taps the waters of the river, which split in half, allowing them both to cross on dry land. This miraculous act recalls the Israelites' crossing of the Red Sea under Moses' leadership, and is now a testimony to God's continuing power through Elijah. Imagine the impact of this moment, with the wind blowing strongly and the river parting, forming a safe path for the two prophets. After crossing the river, Elijah asks Elisha what he wants before he leaves. Elisha, with boldness and faith, asks for a double portion of Elijah's spirit. This request is not for personal power, but to continue God's work with the same strength and authority as his mentor. Elijah replies that Elisha will receive what he has asked for if he sees him being taken away. Suddenly the sky opened up in a dazzling vision. A chariot of fire pulled by horses of fire appears out of the sky, separating Elijah from Elisha. In the midst of this heavenly vision, Elijah is carried up to heaven in a whirlwind. Imagine the scene: the intense brightness of the chariot of fire, the roaring wind, and Elijah being caught up to heaven without tasting death. This moment is unique in biblical history, symbolizing the divine approval of Elijah's ministry and its continuation through Elisha. Elisha, watching everything with wide eyes and a heart full of admiration, sees his mentor disappear into the heavens. Elijah's mantle, now lying on the ground, becomes the tangible symbol of the transfer of power. Elisha picks up the cloak, knowing that it is now his duty to continue God's work. He returns to the Jordan and, with the same cloak, strikes the waters which open again, confirming that Elijah's spirit rests upon him. This event is not just the earthly end of Elijah, but the beginning of a new era. Elijah, with his ascension into heaven, leaves a legacy of faith, courage, and miracles, proving that God is always present with his people. Elijah's ascension is a testimony that God's work never ends with a single individual, but continues through those he calls and empowers. Elisha, with a double portion of Elijah's spirit, takes on his new role with determination and faith. He performs miracles, leads the people, and proclaims God's message with the same intensity and passion as his mentor. The story of Elijah and Elisha teaches us that faith and obedience to God create a lasting legacy that inspires and transforms generations. This epic moment, the ascension of Elijah, remains one of the most inspiring and supernatural events in the Bible. It demonstrates that for those who serve God faithfully, there is a greater purpose and a glorious end, transcending the limitations of earthly life and echoing throughout eternity. Now I want you to write in the comments, how does this story influence your life? What practical lesson can you draw from it? Leave your opinion in the comments. And just next door, I have another story of another man who walked with God, and for that reason also did not know death. May God bless your life. See you in the next video.